Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 2:45. I'm going to start the session right away. We'll just let these last people get in and grab their seats. And just to make sure, while we're waiting for them, if you were looking for the session titled Power Up Your Council with Clear Roles, you're in the right room. If you were looking for something else, you might want to check the agenda and get to that room really quickly. All right, well, good afternoon. My name is Darren Hill. I'm a member of the SUMA Board of Directors and on the executive. I've been on the SUMA board for 10 years. I've been a city councillor in Saskatoon for the last 11 years. This afternoon, you are here joining us for Power Up Your Council with Clear Roles. I had an opportunity to see some of the first session when this was presented in the first go-around earlier today, and I'm looking forward to seeing the entire session. There was a lot of information provided that I wish I would have had when I was first elected. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot more today. Before we get started, I want to note a few things, emergency safety and some issues for you that you need to pay attention to. In pages 24 and 25 of your convention handbook, which is the big one, that's going to tell you where all of the emergency exits are. It's also going to tell you where the AEDs are located with the building. We want to make sure that during the whole conference and convention, everybody is safe during all of the sessions that we are having. So familiarize yourself where they are, and you're probably going to be reminded about this in every session that you do attend today. Please note that we are recording this audio session. So probably towards the end of the month a little bit, you're going to be able to find every session that's being held at convention on the SUMA YouTube channel. So when we get to the question and answer period after the presentation, we're going to ask you to step up to one of the two mics and speak clearly into the mic. We want you to identify yourself by name, tell us your municipality, because we want to be able to catch the question in the recording as well as what the answer is going to be. So those people that weren't able to be at the session have the full experience of the questions and the answers. When we plan for our members, and we try to tailor the topics for the speakers, the topics and the speakers' presentations for all of our members' needs. The full bios for each of the speakers are available on the event-based app. Who's using the app here right now in the room? I want to do a quick poll. Who would be comfortable just using the app and not a printed handbook in future conventions? I had one no over here, but I had a lot of yes hands going up. So, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you give your full attention to the presenters, and during the course of their presentation, if you have some questions pop in your mind, maybe write them down, because we're going to have plenty of opportunity afterwards for Q&A, and we will take any questions that you do have at that time. The session today is sponsored by the Village at Stonebridge, and we have Tammy Shabilo. She's the sales and marketing consultant here on behalf of the Village of Stonebridge to introduce our speaker. So ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for our sponsor and welcome Tammy.
I'm going to make sure Rob gets up here. Our speaker is also my tech man for today, so thank you for that. My name is Tammy Shabilo, and I represent the Village at Stonebridge. And you might wonder why senior housing development is here sponsoring at SUMA. We chose to come here today because we are thinking differently. We are owned by your largest senior care provider in the province. Luther Care Homes is a developer and partner on this project with Meridian Developers out of Saskatoon. This project thinks differently. So imagine a senior housing project that allows you the continuum of living with the public integrated. So the video I'm going to show you in a moment shows you a public bistro with a bar component, a movie theater, a dining room that is chef-driven, has public library, has places for children to play while they're there. So when you see this video, please know that we're here to challenge you in your roles and goals to look at senior housing differently, to plan it into your communities for the next generation. Many of you may have colleagues, family who are snowbirds. Well, that generation within the next 10 to 15 years will be blossoming into seniors who need more in order to stay independent and healthy than what we currently provide in the healthcare genre. So with that, I'll show you the video.
The Village at Stonebridge is Saskatoon's newest, most innovative retirement community, offering enriched independent living with a variety of beautiful and spacious suites. All the amenities you need and enjoy in life right outside your front door. The Village at Stonebridge brings a unique experience never seen before. Developed with a new generation of retirees in mind, the Village is fully equipped with a bistro, public library, fitness room, movie theater, golf simulator, and leading care services to maintain an independent lifestyle. Move in before April 1st and receive your first month's rent free.
Once again, thank you for attending this session, and I'd like to introduce your speaker. Rob DeRooy, Vice President of Governance and Strategy, is with Governance Solutions Incorporated. Rob's expertise is in corporate governance, strategic planning, member and stakeholder engagement. He possesses an in-depth knowledge of governance and best practices. Please help me welcome your speaker, Rob DeRooy.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, Tammy, and thank you for coming. We're going to have a good session this afternoon. Now, I know we said, write down your questions and save them to the end. If you have a question you really want to ask it during the session, feel free. There are microphones, which usually lend to the end of the session, but interactivity is good. We will all learn more if we are engaged, so feel free at any time to ask a question. Even if you just put up your hand and I'll stop and let you come to the mic. And it may work better if we're asking them as they come up. It's up to you. It's your session. Oh, here's my clicker. So today we're going to talk about really high-level governance and what governance is really meant to be, what it's all about, what we should do as council members and as council to provide governance. So why do they exist? Why do councils exist? The economic drivers and theories behind that. The definition of governance. How do councils govern? What do we do to govern? Because governing isn't the same as managing. They are distinctly separate things. They are distinctly separate systems. And we need to draw a line between the two things and provide different things to our communities. Direction and control, the things we do to govern. The tools we use. So we're going to talk about the tools we use to give direction, the tools we use to gain confidence that things are happening the way we want them to. And hopefully a lively question and answer session afterwards to round out our knowledge. And feel free to ask questions. Don't worry about questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question. And we will all learn from the questions that are asked. So, why do municipalities exist? So we're gonna run this ending up with the tools, ending up with those things we need to do. But I want everyone to really understand the why first, because the why is so important. At the end of the day, to how we make decisions and what kind of decisions we make. So, municipalities are corporations, and they're created by provincial statute. So they're given their authority by the province. So there's a statute, and there's acts, and those are the first things you should read when you become a councillor to understand what your authority is and what it is you should be here to do, because it's very prescriptive. So it is a corporation, but it's not a business. We're not here to make profit like a business is. It's a corporation because we create corporations so that the municipality can act as a person. That's why it's a corporation. It's a fiction. It's called a legal fiction. We create corporations so that businesses and municipalities can write contracts and purchase things and do those things that prior to the advent of corporations only people could do. Only people could sign the check for a building and own the building or own the land or enter a contract. So the corporation part is really just there. It's this legal fiction that allows the municipality to act as a person when it's doing contracting and things like that. But because it is a corporation and not a business, it has a purpose. And that purpose is the public interest. That purpose is to provide and deliver public goods, public services. And we do that for the people in our communities. So a municipality is something that's defined by the province. It's given its legal standing by the province, given its authority through the province, and its authority is also limited by the province through statute. And it's there to provide goods and services for the community, for our municipality, for our town, for our village. We're not driven by profit, we're driven by our ability to provide as much positive environment and service to our community within the budgets that we have to do it in. So that's not unlike a corporation other than the profit motive. Corporation wants to provide things to customers in order to make a profit. We want to do it in order for the public benefit, for the public good. So public goods actually have an economic determinant as well. A public good is defined in that it's, the simple definition would be that it's something that once you create it, anyone can enjoy it, and your enjoyment of it won't affect someone else's enjoyment of it, and it's hard to restrict the use. So the biggest example of that is a lighthouse. Once you build a lighthouse, anyone, any mariner, probably lighthouse is not the best choice in Saskatchewan, but you know, as a country, we're a marine country, we have coasts, none here, but you know, a lighthouse, once you build it, it's for the good of all. And someone seeing that light of the lighthouse doesn't restrict someone else from seeing that light of a lighthouse. Those are public goods. They aren't controlled by the invisible hand of economics that consumer goods would be controlled by. So we want to use taxpayers' money to give them the most beneficial public goods and public services that we can. So, but because municipalities are also corporations, councils are the governing bodies of municipalities. And because they're the governing bodies of municipalities, that means that councillors are fiduciaries. You have a fiduciary duty once you become a councillor to act in the best interest of the corporation or to act in the best interest of the municipality. So that means balancing the interests of all the people in your community. Not only listening to the loudest voice, not only listening to the special interests, not only listening to your own desires, but to balance and to make benefit for the entire community. So we're going to just talk now about agency theory. So we've got this municipality, it's a corporation. You're a fiduciary because you're a councillor, so you have this duty to act in the best interest of the entire community. And we created things like councils and boards based on this economic theory called agency theory. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, because it's relatively new. It's not even 500 years old yet. It was developed in the 1600s. And it was originally from a treatise called The Wealth of Nations. So it wasn't a corporate governance manual. It was governance at a nation level that this was developed at. But it applies to governance as a whole. And the important things we really need to know about agency theory, we certainly don't need to know everything about all of what's in there, but we do want to talk about principals and agents and councils. So, principals for you are your community, are your ratepayers, are your voters, are the people in your village, in your town. Because they're the people who have, and also the province is involved, because they've created these municipalities by statute, so they have a say, right? So we can do things that we really think are great for our village or town, but if the province doesn't think so highly of it or hasn't given you the power to do it, they will let you know, and not kindly, right? So principals create municipalities, so the government and, of course, your voters. They have a purpose for the needs of having this municipality in place. they have needs that they want met because it's there and from it. And they're the ones who contribute. So they're the ratepayers that contribute, that invest, that give you the resources and the capital to do those things for their benefit. This is the important part of agency theory, is that when we act as fiduciaries, when we act as counselors, we're acting in the best interests of the municipality, which means we're trying to act in the best interests of our principals. We're trying to make our decisions based on those competing interests from within our communities to find and make decisions that provide the best benefit for the capital we get from them. Agents are the other side. That's your CAO. That's your staff. Right? Agents are the people who have ideas of what to do with all that money. Right? Like, give us bonuses. Give us more time off. That's some of the ideas they have for the money. Pay us better. They don't always have the best ideas for the money. You know, they may see things they want to do. But in all they do, they use that capital. They use those resources. Your CAO and the staff are the ones who actually employ the resources that they're given to create this public benefit. And there's always tension between these two groups. Every economic system out there was designed to work on these tensions. Think about those tensions. Like I just said, the self-interests of the CAO and staff, they want to be paid better, they would like more time off. That's their own self-interest. They have a right to that self-interest, right? But if we look at that to the extreme, that's a competing interest to the people of the municipality that want no potholes, that want good roads, that want infrastructure in place, that want all these things, and they want it for as little tax money as they can give you. So that's where the tension starts. And then the other thing from that theory we talk about is agency costs. So agency costs are when agents use resources or money in a way that doesn't align with the needs of the community. So councils are there to help the community avoid agency costs, help them avoid CAO and staff spending their hard-earned tax dollars on things they don't want or things they don't need. And that can be, well, we often think about that. We think, well, we're there to make sure they don't pad their expenses and don't get paid too much. And well, there's some of that. But we're also there to make sure they aren't spending more than they should on maintenance of lands versus roads. We're also there to make sure they don't spend more than they should on legal fees to fight a legal battle that may not be that important to the community, but is important in principle to them. Right? So agency costs aren't always nefarious. You know? Agency costs are just often people thinking they're doing the right thing and effectively spending money in a way that doesn't align with the interests of the entire community. So councils are there to help avoid that. And then the agency problem is compounded by the fact that usually agents know far more about what's going on than principals. And quite frankly, they usually know far more about what's going on than counselors. Counselor is still a part-time job, right? CAO is usually a full-time job. They've got their fingers in everything, and they should have. But the result of that is it compounds this idea because they tend to have more and control almost all the information. I had a question in the first segment, and we had a relatively new mayor, and their CAO had been there for 30 years and just left, and they found a lot of problems in the wake of that departure, right? So this is a common occurrence because of this agency costs and agents knowing more. So what we're going to talk about when we talk about those tools and talk about what council does is how do we avoid that situation? What processes do we put in place? What things do we do to avoid a situation where a CAO knows so much more than us and isn't telling us everything we need to know? And perhaps just telling us what they think we need to know or what they would like us to know. Because one of the things we're going to learn today is that as council, you must be directive on what you want. And that includes being directive on what reports you get. One of the other things that was lamented was, and we couldn't really find it because, you know, I'm a mayor, but I'm not a CPA. I can't read a financial statement and find those things, right? So if you're getting reports that are really complicated that you don't understand as a council, then as a council you need to say, we need something we can understand. We need a balanced or a budget variance report, which just says, this is what we budgeted. This is what we're spending. We spent too much. We didn't spend it all, right? Very simple to understand. You don't need to be a CBA to understand a budget variance report, right? But being directive with staff is, this is what we need as a council, right? That's part of what we're going to talk about next. So, principals and agents, council is there to make sure that the money we spend is spent on the things that our community wants. That those public benefits and services are aligned with the needs of our communities. We're the voice of our voters. We're the voice of our villages. We're the voice of our people to the agents. In other words, we direct agents how to spend the money through the budgeting process and other means, and we do that based on what we feel is in the best interest of the entire community. And as fiduciaries, we ultimately have the authority and the responsibility to act in the best interest of the municipality and not in our own best interest, right? And we must not act in our own self-interest while we do these things. And that goes beyond just pure conflict of interest. Pure conflict of interest is a direct pecuniary gain, where we can draw a direct line between a decision and money going into your pocket. There's also, indirect, through family, through friends. There's also perceived conflicts. But it really comes down to when you're making a decision, internally asking yourself, am I making this decision because it's going to help me, or am I making this decision because it's going to help the community and help a bunch of people? Right? So just graphically, to make this make more sense to you of why councils exist and where they fit in this, if we look at this graph, you can see on the column, we're talking about returns or outcomes, economic, social, and cultural returns of what we do with our resources. And principals, our voters, would like to have absolutely fantastic economic, social, and cultural returns for their taxes. And they'd like to do that by giving you as little tax as possible. And CAOs and staff, for the most part, would like to do that for them, but you can't. You can't meet the full expectation. And you have day-to-day things that happen. And you have this thing called risk that you have to optimize, that you have to deal with, right, while you do this. So the council sort of sits in between the two and says, we're going to make sure that the direction from our voters gets to staff to make sure they're doing what voters want, for the most part, in a big picture item. And then we're going to make sure that staff reports back to us so that we can report back to voters that the things they want are happening. And in that way, we're balancing that. And we do that through a couple things we're going to talk a lot about. One in particular, and that's strategy. Strategy allows us to maximize our economic, social, and cultural impact with the least amount of resources, because it provides us clarity of what we want to achieve. So by putting a great plan, great strategic plan together, by having a council work together to have a vision for the municipality, allows us to create an impact while we're in term, rather than just being managers of a municipality while we're in term. So strategy allows us to maximize that column. And then budget oversight and setting allows us to minimize in coordination with strategy. And we'll talk about how to coordinate those two things. And all that is done by understanding the risks we face to do it. Because let's be clear, everything we do has risk. Everything we do to try to improve a municipality has risk. Right? Whether it's growth or trying to fight against growth, putting in a road, not putting in a road, putting in sewers, not putting in, there's risks to everything we do. And the idea is always to optimize our risk. We must take them, so we don't want to eliminate them, right? We want to optimize them. We want to take those risks that are the ones we need to take to make an impact on our municipality, on our village. We want to mitigate those risks as best we can, but understand that there will be risk. And some are worth taking and some aren't. We'll talk a little bit more about risk-taking and risk appetite as we go forward to tools. So, council is there to balance the self-interests of voters and staff. They're there to help avoid agency costs, and that is the costs of municipal staff using money in a way that doesn't move the municipality forward towards your goals and objectives. And that's compacted by staff always knowing more of the ins and outs. See, they have that full-time ability to have that knowledge, but what they don't have, especially in municipal governance, in politically appointed, or sorry, voted in governance, is that accountability lies with councillors. If something goes wrong with staff, you know, Sally doesn't call the CAO when she has a problem, right? When there's a pothole on her street, she doesn't call the CAO. She doesn't call staff. She calls you. She calls the mayor. She calls her counselor, or she'll call all the counselors. She might do it 10 times a day, right? You're held accountable, right? But in order to make that as palatable and as easy as possible, we have to give great direction to staff, right? So that we are moving things forward. So that's enough economics. Probably too much economics, but it's a foundational concept that we're there on behalf of our principals, of our voters. Now let's talk about the definition of governance. Governance is a system by which organizations are directed and controlled. Right? So I've bolded on the sheet there, system, directed, and controlled. System means it is a system. It is systematic. We have rules, we have policies, we have procedures, we have statute. We have a big book of things we probably need to know when we first become a counselor. And I'm sure when you became a counselor, first thing you did was read the Municipal Act, right? No, you didn't do that? Second day? Yet? So all those things are in place for a reason, right? And they're boring, they're really boring to read. And the Act is really boring to read, but it's actually refreshingly short for those of us who read a lot of that sort of material and write some of that material. It's a refreshingly short document. You've got council policy, you've got codes of conduct, you've got policy on how you're supposed to interact together, right? All that stuff is part of the system that we talk about. The important ones, direction and control. Direction means being directive. It means something like, if you can't read the financial statements to the level you need to, you say, I need a variance report on the budget because I can understand that and that tells me what's going on. Directive is also saying, we're going to put a strategic plan in place and we're going to have a vision for our community. We're going to have a mission that we're going to accomplish. We're going to have goals and objectives that we're going to reach that are aspirational, that mean something, that create an impact on our community, that we can look back on in years to come and say, we made a difference. We moved things forward. We weren't just good stewards of the money they gave us. We actually helped our village become more than it was before we became a councillor. That's direction. Direction is also done through policy. Direction is also done through procedure. Right? But the high level stuff is strategy. And then controlled. Controlled is an accounting term. It's not intuitively obvious what they mean by that. But what we really mean is that we want to gain confidence that the things we're directing people to do are being done. That the goals and objectives and big picture impacts we want for our community are going to happen or on their way to happening. Right? That there's a good chance they will happen. So gaining confidence means getting reports back from the system to say, yes, this is what we're doing. Yes, this is what we're achieving. Yes, we're following your direction. Control means gaining confidence that it's happening. So direction, being the rudder of the ship, being directive, matching the needs of your voters to the best ideas of the agents. Control, gaining reasonable assurance or confidence that you're going substantially in the direction you set. If you've got a policy or procedure, you want to know that it's being followed. If you're setting a strategic plan and you have some goals and objectives, if you've set a strategic plan and you achieve everything on that plan, the only thing I can say about your strategic plan is it wasn't very aspirational. Right? You really want that plan to be something with great impact. And we don't always achieve things with great impact. Right? We don't always achieve things with great impact. But sometimes 80% of great impact is still really, really good. So we want to make sure we're substantially in the direction. There are variances at times, right? We may be supposed to be at 80% completion of something and we're only at 75. Maybe that's good enough. Maybe there's reasons for that. Maybe it's not good enough. We want to be directive on that as well. Right? So if we have a goal to be 80% along at such and such a date, that's our goal. Right? That's what we want to achieve. But we might have some tolerance. We might have some risk tolerance on that. We might say 80% is what we want. If we're only at 70%, we're not going to be overly happy, but it's okay. We can still recover from 70. Right? Or we might say if we're supposed to be at 80 and we're at 90, well, maybe that's just a really good thing. Or maybe if we're at 90, we've overspent our budget. We're going too fast. We don't have the cash to support that. We wanted to be at 80% there because that's what we could afford. And we could afford getting to 85, but we need to push that extra 15 into the next year. And you're at 90 and you're over budget, and where are we going to get the money? So there's a range of acceptable outcomes around our goals. And that's what we talk about when we talk about risk tolerance and risk appetite. And being directive. Saying to your CAO, here's our goal, here's the parameters we fall within. If we're outside of those parameters, there's negative ramifications for our village, for our community, for our city. So we're going to follow along with that to gain confidence it's happening. And if we're outside of our parameters, we have to have a serious conversation of how we get back within them. So that's the substantially part. Following those resources. Following the tax money you get. Following the rates. So financial statements are a primary tool, budget variance analysis, but there's also an entire council oversight and an oversight info package. So we can't run council just on financial statements or budget variance reports, because if we're trying to run council just on that, we're not getting enough information. A financial statement will never tell you whether you're achieving an impact on society. It will never tell you if you've got a goal. to have the healthiest community, healthiest municipality in Saskatchewan. If that was your goal, financial statement will never tell you anything about that goal, right? Because we're a corporation but we're not for profit, our goals aren't going to be financial. We're going to have a couple of goals around financial, and that is all around budget. That's all around budget. Our goals are going to be about social and cultural impact. Our goals are going to be about bettering the lives of our community. So by very definition of what we provide in public goods, our measurements are mostly non-financial measurements. So if we want to gain confidence that we're reaching those, we need information coming from management to council about how we're achieving, how we're impacting, what kind of outcomes we're getting from the things we're doing. What we tend to get is financial statements and input measures, right? We get measures like we fixed 10,000 potholes this year. That's an input. Is it good that you fixed 10,000 potholes? Well, if you only had 10,000 potholes, it's really good. If you had 20,000 potholes, it's really bad. And why are we trying to fix potholes? It's not just so that Sally doesn't call us anymore about the pothole in front of her house, or we just fix that one. We want to fix potholes because potholes are dangerous. They cause accidents. They cause damage to cars. They cause insurance rates to go up. They affect the health of our people. So we're fixing potholes. That's an input. Way down here, and it's one of the many, many things, inputs we're going to do to have a healthy community, to have a safe community, right? It's just one of the things. So it's easy to measure how many potholes we fixed or how much money we spent fixing them. It's much harder to measure what the impact of fixing them was. So we tend not to measure those things, but those are actually the important things. The important thing is measuring the health of our community. The important thing is measuring the prosperity of our community. The important thing is setting goals around that so that we can know whether we're making an impact. And that's all about strategy. So that's it on definitions and economics. Now we're going to talk about tools. I told you I was going to spend more time on tools, and I really am. So the first tool for direction is what I've been talking about, a great strategic plan. And if you want to make a difference, if you want your municipality to grow and prosper and be better off than when you became a councillor, we must have great strategic plans. We must create a vision that we can make decisions against. Because not every municipality wants the same things. Not every group of residents wants the same things. If they did, we wouldn't have municipalities. What's good and what's wanted for the citizens of Saskatoon are not necessarily the same things that would be wanted for Regina, right? Or Weyburn. They're different places. They're different sizes. The people there have different expectations of what municipality should be providing them. You may have a more rural municipality that really likes being rural. And a lot of things that would be really good for Saskatoon as far as development and growth would be looked upon very poorly in a rural area that loves their little rural community and doesn't want to see it grow. Right? So having a vision and having goals to reach, having objectives to achieve, looking big picture, looking down the road. Because a vision is something that long after you're a councillor, when you're 90 years old and you've been out of it for years, and you look at the community around you and you smile because you're happy because the vision I had for this community 30 years ago, this is the community we have today. That's a vision, right? That's 30 or 40 years down the road. What do we want to be? What do we want to achieve? What kind of community do we want? So as counselors, this is one of our biggest roles, is creating a vision and goals and objectives around that vision that match the needs of your community. And then using those goals and objectives in that vision to drive your decision making. We're never going to get away from the calls completely. We're never going to get away from the council meetings that deal with the minutiae. You're never going to get to the point necessarily where you don't have special interest groups with a loud voice. But if we spent all our time there, we won't achieve anything. So the important message in this on the strategy side is we need to spend time on it. We need to put aside time on it, both in its development and in its oversight, which we'll talk about a little later, so that we understand that there's something bigger going on here than potholes, something bigger going on here than the flavor of the day complaint, right? That we have a purpose, that we're going to achieve great things together. So that's the really high level direction piece, but that's not the only way we do direction. We also have that other thing I talked about, risk tolerances and appetite, and risk assessments. Because it's really hard to make great decisions without analyzing risk. Because we must take risk. We absolutely positively must take risk. If we don't take risk, we don't achieve anything. I'll share the same story I shared with the previous group from the town I live near. I won't mention what town it is. You'll understand why when I'm done. So many, many years ago, the Optimist Club built a park for our community. Raised the money themselves, built a park, put a big toboggan hill on it. And a generation of families and kids use that toboggan hill every winter. And then one day, some insurance guy pointed out to council the risk they were taking by allowing children to slide down an icy hill. So what do you think they did? You think they just bought more insurance? No, they didn't do that. They said, put big signs up, may not use this hill without a helmet. Not so bad, I suppose. And then a couple years later, the same insurance guy said, well, you know, there's not much statistics that say helmets help. You probably haven't really mitigated your risk. What do you think they did? Buy more insurance? No. They said, we're not going to allow anyone to use this toboggan hill for tobogganing anymore. So at the top of the hill, which I can't tell you the exact name of, but part of the name of the hill is such and such toboggan hill, there's big signs saying, do not toboggan on this toboggan hill. So that's the risk of trying to eliminate risk. Eliminate fun, eliminate community happiness. The day they put that sign up, over 200 families showed up to go tobogganing in defiance. Right? So when I talk about risk, and I talk about risk tolerance and risk appetite, what is acceptable risk? We need to decide that, and we need to be directive. We need to tell people, we need to tell staff what acceptable risk means to us. That it's okay that we're taking a risk by having a toboggan hill in our community. It's okay to put a sign up saying you're taking a risk by going on the toboggan hill. It's okay that we may have to spend a little extra money on insurance, because the alternative is having a sign at the top of the toboggan hill saying you can't toboggan on our hill. Someone earlier said, well, why wouldn't they just have them sign a waiver? Well, I can tell you what a waiver is, because it's not a protection. And a waiver is you writing a letter saying, we understand we have a risk. We understand this is inherently dangerous. We are admitting this fully to you, please sign this piece of paper so you know that we know that. So that when you sue us, we can't say we didn't know that. Right? Admitting that there is a risk is not going to, and having them sign off on it does nothing to protect you. Matter of fact, you're basically admitting that you know you had the risk in writing. So it's going to help them. So, risk tolerances, risk appetites. We must have risk, we must optimize it. In other words, we must take risks. The best way to describe tolerances and appetite would be something you probably all have or should have, and that's an investment policy. Right? An investment policy is a directive tool that says to someone, here is our risk tolerance. Because it says, if we have excess funds, we are going to invest them. We would like to make a 5% return on our funds. That's our goal. However, by policy, you may not invest this money in a mutual fund or the open market or in any kind of vehicle that has a downside risk negative. In other words, our voters probably wouldn't be very happy if we invested all of our reserves in the market and the market took a big downturn. Or perhaps we invested all of our reserves in BlackBerry 10 years ago and we don't have any reserves, or Northern Telecom, or something else that's taken a big dive. So we're saying, we want to make 5%, here's the amount of risk we're willing to take. Don't put it in anything that can go below zero. We must preserve our capital. We'd like to make money on it. That's risk direction. That's saying we're willing to take a risk. The risk is within this parameter. That's giving us appetite and tolerance. And then ERM, enterprise-wide risk management, assessment, and map. So what is that? That's usually done by staff, and depending on the size of your municipality, you may not have capacity to have that. But it's important to understand what risks you have, the material ones, the big ones. Don't try to understand every risk you have, because there's hundreds of thousands of them. But what are the ones that are really that could bankrupt your municipality? What are the ones that are so material that you'd never reach your goals and objectives, or you'd have a huge rate change in order to overcome them? Those are the material ones. And assess them. What's their likelihood of happening? What's the impact of them if they happen, and how do we mitigate it? So that's risk direction. And then council, CAO, committee charters. What are we talking about there? So responsibilities, who does what? Right, if you strike a committee, they should have a document that says, this is X such and such committee, this is what they do. This is why we struck it, this is their purpose, this is their authority. They have the authority to make no decisions, they have the authority to do some diligence work and make a recommendation to council. Right, but make it clear when you strike the committee what authority they have. And this is how they should reach consensus, this is how they should work together and act. And have the same for your council, right? So most councils have policy around how you're supposed to interact, how you're supposed to work together, if you have rules of order for council meetings. And I think anyone who's been a councillor for more than a day understands why those are there, because council meetings don't always go according to Robert's Rules of Orders. They don't always go according to decorum. They aren't always collegial or friendly. So that's why we put those rules in place. But that's being directive. We're also directive by creating delegations of authority. One of the things we talked about earlier when I had that question from the mayor with the CAO who had left and left with a problem is one of the things that may have helped with that would be a strong delegation of authority document. A delegation of authority document is direction on who has the authority to make what decision, at what amount, for what purpose. Right? So, that could be as simple as anything over $10,000 must come to council. It could be, if you're really risk averse, it could be $500. If you want to have a council meeting every day. Because you would. Because they make $500 decisions every minute. Right? So you have to set it high enough to do the job you're supposed to do. But not so high that you would be losing sleep at night that someone's spending, $1 million and you don't even know about it. And it's not just about dollars. It's about committing you to contracts. It's about insurance, right? Council should know, right, what insurance they have, because it's a big risk mitigation thing. It's about saying to your CAO, we want you to go do your job. We're going to delegate, because you have the authority as trustees, as fiduciaries of this corporation, which is your municipality, to manage the affairs of the municipality. That doesn't mean they want you to do all the work. You don't have to physically go out and fill potholes, right? You're going to delegate authority to the CAO to allow them to go out and make those things happen. But we want to be specific about it. It should be layered. Should talk about insurance and contracts. Should talk money, right? Talk about budget variances, right? Talk about you can't move money from one part of the budget to the other without talking to us about it. That sort of thing. So that you have directive written document on who can make what decision. And then a code of conduct. So we want a code of conduct for the organization, for the municipality, for the workers, for staff. There should be a code of conduct for staff. There should also be a code of conduct for councillors. Lots of municipalities don't have that. And lots of times that's simply because councillors say, we're not hired, we're voted in. The voters will decide whether we're doing the right things or not. We don't need any other oversight. But having a code of conduct helps council when you have rogue councillors. Because it's a long time between elections if you've got someone who behaves badly all the time in their own interests, under the guise that, well, I got voted in, so I can do what I want, right? And that's the rarity. That's the exception, not the rule. But having a code of conduct allows you to define what good behavior is and have some sort of censure for it when it's not there. But certainly a code of conduct for the organization as well. And then budget. Budget's the last thing, the last of our 4 tools for direction. And often people say, well, why would budget be in direction? That's a control item. That's how you gain assurance that we aren't spending money where we shouldn't or spending too much money. We've got to look at budgets a different way. Council isn't there to look at the bottom line of the budget and say, yep, it's all affordable good, right? We've got to start looking at budgets strategically. We've got to start looking at budgets through categories and tying it back to our strategies and our plans and our goals and our objectives and things we want to achieve and say, are we resourcing what we want to achieve? Are we spending too much on potholes and not enough on culverts? Are we spending too much on roads and not enough on sewers? Are we spending too much on infrastructure and not enough on culture? Right? What do we want to achieve? Is our budget resourcing it? And if it isn't resourcing it, can we move it? Can we get more? Can we find alternate funding? What can we do to achieve the big things we want to achieve? That's how we should be looking at our budgets. That doesn't mean we don't look at the bottom line. Doesn't mean we don't have to find balance. Doesn't mean we don't pay attention to variances. But when we're approving a budget, does it resource what we want to achieve? Is the question we should be asking ourselves. That's the direction part of our involvement with approving a budget. Quite frankly, that's why we reserve budget approval for councils. Excuse me. And then we have tools for control. Once again, control is just gaining confidence that it's all happening. So we have an annual report. So that's your audited financial statements, some sort of management narrative you may have. Where are we compared to where we said we would be? So that works to help us understand on the financial side of things where we are at the end of the year, but it doesn't really tell us if we're achieving anything. So we go over to those tools in the next column. Performance dashboard and scorecard, usually quarterly. Because, if you have monthly meetings, as most of you do, you may not see much movement in a big goal or objective in a month. But you're going to see movement quarterly, hopefully. So what are we talking about as a scorecard? Well, scorecard simply means there's no point in making a goal or an objective or anything that you want to achieve without putting a measurement to it, without knowing what the measurable effect of that will be. And not as an input, not how many potholes did we fill, but, how safe is our community? How many accidents and injuries have we had due to bad roads? What's the impact on the people who live here of those things we're doing? Right? And start measuring what those impacts are. Once you start measuring those impacts that are related to the things you want to achieve, then you will truly know whether you're making an impact. You see, because if we only measure inputs, it literally comes down to another way of looking at risk. Because there's two major forms of risk for councils and for organizations. There's the risk of doing things right or doing things wrong. Right? And there's the risk of doing the wrong things. So if we only measure what we're doing, we never know whether we're doing the right things. Right? Years ago, I wrote a newsletter on that. And I used the NHL and Gary Bettman's decision to open up in a lot of U.S. cities. Right? So the risk of doing the right things is it the right thing to do to open up in all those cities, even though maybe they're going to be poorly attended? Is it the right strategy? And the other thing, doing things right, would be, wow, if we did that, if we had an expansion team or the agreement we have with players and we write the agreement contracts wrong, then we've done things wrong and they can be detrimental. But what could be more detrimental is if we had the wrong strategy to begin with. And we start expanding into a bunch of cities, they all have poor attendance, 6 or 7 teams go under, wow, the NHL is now in trouble. Ended up, it worked out pretty well. Even though there's some poorly attended cities, from a revenue generation base and everything, that strategy worked out pretty well. And that's the difference between measuring impacts and outcomes and measuring inputs. Inputs just tell you what you're doing. They will never tell you whether those are the right things to do. They will never get you to understanding or having confidence that you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. So measurements need to go up. And the reason most people don't measure impacts is they're harder to measure. Right? Satisfaction levels, health levels. All those things are much harder to measure than what we spent on potholes last year. Somebody can get you that. The other ones are harder to get, but they're far more important if you want to really govern and really set direction for an organization. Key performance indicators. So those are the things that are most important to you. There might only be 3 or 4, but they're things you want to know at every quarter or maybe every meeting. Right? Depending on your strategy, those will be different from municipality to municipality. But your most important goal could be infrastructure. Your most important goal could be growth. Right? Your most important goal could be attracting industry. I don't know what it might be. But if it's your most important goal, you're probably going to have some indicator of success on that you're going to want to see all the time. And then some risk reports, if you can get them. But what we're talking about here is a different way of looking at what we get at council, what we deal with at council. By asking for a scorecard based on the impacts and the outcomes of what you do, you're raising the level of your dialogue and discussion. You're raising your level of oversight from Sally's pothole to the community's health. Right? By doing that, we're governing. By doing that, we're creating impacts. We're moving our municipalities towards something important or that they feel is important. Right? Now, this is next one is a little touchier, so I like it. Council and CAO evaluations. How many of you evaluate your CAO every year? Okay, that might have been close to a majority. How many of you that evaluate your CAO every year set goals and objectives for your CAO at the beginning of the year, and that's what your evaluation is based on at the end of the year? A few less hands there. Right? So this evaluation, this is about tying it all together. Your CAO is the leader of those agents. They're the leader who is supposed to make all the things happen. You're giving direction. They're the one who's supposed to make it happen. So they are accountable not just for their job function, not just for getting the bills paid on time and feeding information to council and managing the organization. They're also, or should be, expected to have achievements, to use their influence and their leadership skills to achieve more than just that, and to help the municipality get to its goals and objectives. So we need to be clear with them at the beginning of the year. This is what I would like to see you achieve, which will help us achieve what we want to. In other words, this is your role in us achieving our hopes and dreams. And this is what we expect you to do towards that. And we're going to have this performance dashboard and these KPIs. We're going to see every quarter how you're doing towards that. It's not going to be any surprise at the end of the year, oh, by the way, you didn't do what we wanted you to. You will probably know going into the evaluation, but that's okay. We want them to know what we expect. We want them to know what we want them to achieve. And we want them to achieve it. And then we evaluate effectively at the end of the year because we're evaluating them against what we said we wanted them to achieve. That's not the touchy part. Council evaluations. How many councils here do an evaluation of the council itself? I don't think that's a majority. Yeah, 0 is not majority, right? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think so. In the corporate world, it's best practice to evaluate a board every year. In the corporate world, they're not voted in. In the corporate world, is a little different. That doesn't mean that that can't apply as something good to do for your council, if done right. If done as we look at how well did our council do, not councilors. Together, how effective were we? Did we do all the things we were supposed to do, and did we do them well? The only reason to do an evaluation of a CAO or a council is so that that council or a CAO can be better the next year. That's why they're best practices, so that we can have continuous improvement, so that we can gain some confidence that things are going the direction we want them to. And then finally, interim or quarterly financial statements. And I would urge you to take a look at going beyond the standard financial statements on those and starting to put budget variance analysis in. Much easier to read. Doesn't tell you the same as a financial statement, but it tells you when you're on and off budget. It tells you on all your major initiatives where you stand budget-wise. And it's a great oversight tool so that the CAO and your delegated authority document, so you've got this document that says you can, if we've budgeted for it, you can spend it, right? But then you got to get a report on budget variance analysis to make sure that they're following the delegation of authority document. Because just because you wrote it down doesn't mean you do it. Because just like you guys, they probably didn't come in and read all the policies the first day they signed up. First day the CAO on the job doesn't go to the manual book any more than you go to the statute. Right? Oversight. We gain confidence by tying the things we do together. We gain confidence by not just setting a strategic plan, but setting the achievements and measurable achievements that go with it, and by getting regular reports on how we're doing towards them. We set a delegation of authority document, but we get regular reports on how we're doing against those things we have delegated authority on. A delegation of authority document could say you can make a decision up to $100,000, right? But between 70 and 100, you can make the decision, but you need to tell us about it. You need to give us a report on that and why it happened, right? So it's not just about what authority they have, but baking into that what kind of accountability structure you want in. So being directive and building in gaining control at the same time. So you can put both those things into a document, the direction and built-in control mechanisms. So those are the tools. Just big picture, high level, right? We're directive through strategy, we're directive through policy. We're directive about what reports we want and how they want them to look. We're directive about what measures we want to make. And we're directive on what we want to achieve. So what is the purpose of council? Right? The system by which the municipality is directed and controlled. The purpose of council is to provide direction, to set achievements, to move things forward, to make life better, and then to gain confidence that those things are happening. And we do that on behalf of our principals, who are the people who vote us in, who are our community. We do that on behalf of the community. Did you have a question? It's time for questions anyway, so come on down. Now there's a little card on there that tells you what you're supposed to do. It says, be really nice to Rob. Don't ask tough questions. No, it doesn't say any of that. It says to tell us your name and where you're from.
Name's Dennis Novoselsky. I'm a counselor in Prince Albert. My question is a little scenario to you to put you in our shoes. You are a counselor in a small city like Prince Albert, and you ask for input, data from other Canadian cities on how they run a particular department and the problems that they are facing. And your senior leader, your mayor, tells you, you cannot request this information without my permission. How would you handle this?
So, there is a couple things that are important in this. First of all, council has power together. Individual councillors don't have power on their own. And you should have policy around things like that, for one thing, and you would go to policy. But if it's something you really think you need and you feel strongly for, then you need to have council decide that that's a good thing to do. Council.
I'll be more specific using the example. Council on this one can't because it's limited to the police commission. Separate act.
Right. So council can't come together and say we want this information.
That's right.
So it's the mayor's prerogative, or is it? It's not.
I'm going to challenge you if you say it is.
Yeah, I don't believe it is.
You have
Right.
my response in this situation is I have a duty to the citizens of the whole city to try run the department better, more efficiently, more accountable, and reduce the costs which are breaking our city. And I said, I'll get the data, I'll bring it back to you, and I'll make some recommendations to make things better.
Yeah.
That's my position.
Is there a cost?
Well, for me to ask for information from other cities, there's no cost. I'm just doing my homework.
So why wouldn't you do it?
I am doing it.
See?
I just wanted to see, because if I was the elected leader, I'd be saying to my councilors, do more of this. We want to make as a team this
Right.
city more efficient, more better, instead of a $19 million police budget that's
Yeah.
breaking our city.
Yeah.
Example. The last one I wanted to say is I do a report card to my constituents in my area of the city 3 times a year. And this year, not in my newsletter, I'm also doing the report card. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so the mayor says, no, don't do it, but can the mayor really stop you? Mayor can't stop you, right? The mayor's the leader of council, but if it's got no budget implication, no policy implication.
City council doesn't have the authorization of the police commission.
Right, yeah. So he may have reasons for it, but. Any other questions?
Rod Perkins, Mayor of Kindersley. Probably a simple question that I don't know the simple answer to. Last year when I was elected, it was 5 out of 6 councillors were elected, so I kind of picked one guy that I knew and said I think I'd like him to be the deputy mayor, and he was. Unfortunately, he'll be walking down the halls in Regina in another month and a bit, so he's not available. I guess my question is, what is the proper way to get a deputy mayor? Should it come to a council motion, or is it the mayor's prerogative?
Well, I don't know the answer to your question.
Neither did my CAO.
Yeah, I don't believe that's in the act, is it? That's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. It's not in the act, so that's why I couldn't answer it. You have to set policy. This is the whole thing about setting direction and setting policy. If you have no policy on it within your municipality, then you have to create policy. If you don't create policy, then it could be the mayor's prerogative, or it could go to council, because there's nothing in the legislation about it. I was thinking about the legislation, but there's nothing in legislation, there's nothing in regulation that says it. So if it's not there, and then the question is, what would you like the policy to be? Is it a big kerfuffle? Is it a big fight? If it's a big kerfuffle and a big fight, then you say, okay, let's sit down and talk about it and create a policy. And then going forward, you don't have to worry about having a fight over something that's not necessarily that important. All right? Yeah.
Gerald Albers, Mayor, City of Lloydminster. You talked about something that I'd never thought of, evaluating the council. Who evaluates the council? Because we can sit there and say, hey, we're doing a great job, left side, right side, and go around the circle and we have a group hug and sing Kumbaya. Or who do you look to? Because when you have one, maybe 2 people that show up at a council meeting on a regular basis, is that the best judges? One of them may have been a former candidate that's waiting for an opportunity to run for council. So I'm looking for some direction and some ideas.
Yeah, great question. So council would evaluate itself, not unlike a corporate board. They evaluate themselves. Now you just put a process in place. You do a little survey, you run it through senior HR person on staff or legal counsel, or you hire an outside firm just to run the survey and give you the data back, asking high-level questions about performance, get the information back, understand where you're achieving, where you're not achieving, where you can get better. But essentially you do it yourself, and most organizations start with just survey-based, right? Anonymous, simple, and web-based. It can be, we've done surveys that are 120 questions long, and we've done them 10 questions long, right? And you can also talk about it. How did we do this year? The difficulty with that is you're mostly in open session, right? But that should be something you could do in a closed session and just have a specific governance dialogue around the council and say, what could we do better? Right? What could we have done better this meeting? Talk about it. We're allowed to do that. But yeah, surveys are the simplest thing. But yeah, you evaluate yourself. It's one of those things where the corporate world is the same thing. The board has to evaluate itself, set its own pay. Any other questions? If there's no more questions, I want to thank you for. Oh wait, we got one more. See, put a timeline on it.
Actually, it's not my question, it's hers, and she's too shy. Tammy Langham, I think, just my hair title. Yeah, counselor. What measures do we use or indicators do we use to measure the CAO? How do you go about doing that?
So typically, measuring a CAO you would look to your strategy and say, what do we want to achieve?
Right.
Then you would look to what the CAO is doing and have a dialogue with them at the beginning of the year. You'd actually talk to them about this. I'm big on talking about things. And say, here's what we want to achieve, and here's what we think your goals should be for the year to help us achieve those. Right? So we would like, as a goal for your CAO, we would like you to reduce absenteeism by 10%, or we would like you to ensure that we have staff retention levels, or that we have certain cost savings. Whatever your goals are that you want the CAO, that's in the CAO's control or sphere of influence to achieve. You agree to those goals at the beginning of the year, whatever they may be, and then you measure them along the way. So you look to things that, first of all, to be fair to them, they need to at least be in their sphere of influence. So they'd have to be able to influence the outcome. So control is a little too narrow. You don't reach many goals and objectives in your sphere of control, because your sphere of control is usually just your job description. But you can influence things to happen. That's when you get into stretch, right? Like when you start to ask more of staff and you can influence them to do more and achieve more than you do with the budget you have. Now you're talking sphere of influence, and those are where the goals and objectives are. But are things that they can influence to help you reach your goals and objectives. And it's a dialogue you have at the beginning of the year, so everyone's in agreement. Yep, I can do that. Right? Your CEO's got to, at the beginning of the year, believe they can achieve those things. If they work a little harder, or a little smarter, or follow a course of action that is going to get them there, and then that's how you measure at the end of the year.
Okay, so now I have one for me.
See, that's how the card says you can only ask one question. This is how she's getting around it.
Well, because
You got to go to the back of the line.
there is no, okay.
Oh yeah, there is no line. Okay.
Hi.
Yes.
I'm Tammy, counselor from Langham. So this was just absolutely fantastic for me. I really enjoyed. I tried writing down a lot of stuff, but you mentioned in there about information from staff coming to council and how they weed things out.
They can.
Right.
I'm not saying they all
They
do.
Okay, hypothetically. Hypothetically, it may be happening. I don't know.
If you're not directive with them on what you want, it will
Right.
happen.
So how do you know if you're getting accurate information? Like when you have residents that come up to you and say, I noticed that letter that I sent asking and it wasn't in the agenda, and so what's happening, right? So now some have taken it upon themselves to directly bring it to council rather than dropping it off because they don't think they're getting heard. They think they're getting shredded. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? I mean, that's a reality.
Yeah.
Right?
So there's the concept of you be directive about what you want.
Yeah.
But there's also got to be ramifications if you're getting inaccurate information. It's vital that the information be accurate and complete.
Right.
And if you can't trust the information you're getting, then you can't trust your staff.
Or you're not getting the information.
Right.
Right. And
if
then
it's supposed to come to council, if you've been directed, right, if you've said in writing somewhere, all letters that come to you regarding this must come to council, and they don't, if it's a one-time thing and it's an oversight, right,
Okay.
then we talk about that. But if it's a continual thing, in other words, you believe they're doing it on purpose because they don't want that stuff to come to council, now you've got a staff issue. And when you have a staff issue, then you have progressive discipline, just like you had with any other kind of staff issue. But the only way you're going to know it is, okay, so someone's come to you and said, I sent in a letter, didn't come, okay? You talk to them. Someone else says it. Now 3 or 4 people are saying it. Now you're saying, okay, what's your process for letters getting to us? I want to understand what the process is. How is the process falling apart? Right? Is there someone on staff who's doing this? Or is it purposely? If you put pressure on it, it'll stop happening. Right? We don't like to dig that deep, but we always have to dig that deep if things aren't happening the way we've directed them to happen. We must, right? So we need to understand the process, understand where it's breaking down, right? And by shedding light on it, sunshine's the best disinfectant. The problem will go away. But if it doesn't go away, then you've got a staff issue.
Right, and that's just letters. So if there's information that's coming there and not necessarily coming to council, that's the harder one, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. If there's information that's pertinent to council, that you've directed staff must come to council.
But
If
we
you
don't know
haven't been
that.
directive, then they're going to use their judgment on what should come to council.
Right.
Because your time is valuable, their time is valuable, and they may feel they can handle it on their own. So if you aren't directive about what should come to council, they will make the decision for you because you've hired them to make decisions for you.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing that they do that from time to time. It just depends on the nature of it.
Right.
It was like the mayor that talked to me earlier. The problem they had with the outgoing CAO, one was he moved from budget money here to there, and all of a sudden there was a big liability sitting there. The other was there were letters from the auditor that the council hadn't seen talking about the issue, right? So in gaining control, some of the things we do to gain control is put structures in place around the direction we're giving. For instance, if you have an auditor come in to do your financial statements and do an audit, does anyone from council meet privately with the auditor to say, did you have any issues with the CAO or staff in producing your audit? And is there anything I should be worried about without the CAO there? Right? Governance 101. Trust, verify. Right? Time for a committee of council or someone from council or all of council to sit privately with the auditor without the CAO to ask the question, is there anything I should be worried about in these financial statements? Did you have any material arguments over assumptions made in the financial statements? And also saying, you know, any letters that come from the auditor should also be shared with the mayor or with council. Right? But
And
being
I'm not
directive.
saying
Yeah.
that's happening, it just,
No, I'm,
that
yeah.
came up.
Okay.
I don't have a question, but I'm a CAO, so I did some research for the gentleman who asked about the deputy and acting mayor. So it is section 91.1 of the Municipalities Act deals with that. So it's council that appoints the deputy mayor.
Well, it is.
And I mean, you might have the case where your mayor will make recommendations and it'd probably be accepted, no problem. But if there was a problem, it takes a motion
So
of
there you go.
council to,
That's why we need to read the act when we become councillors. Now you know. Yeah, I didn't remember that from the act. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Did anybody think of a question from the amount of time it took me to get from my chair up here? Langham, you're done? Good. Awesome. Rob, thank you for being here with us today. And looking through the audience, I see representation from resort communities, towns, villages, and cities, and everything that you presented today is relevant to everyone that is in this room today. I wish that I would have had this presentation in my first year on council, especially the part where you said about do what's best for the community, not the loudest voice. I spent a few months listening to the loudest voices, and I certainly learned that that was a mistake. On behalf of SUMA, thank you very much for your presentation. And just for the record, my pothole Sally called twice during your presentation. So, again, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Village at Stonebridge, and Tammy Shabilo, who is their marketing manager, who is here with us today. Thank you very much. Please show your appreciation. Now remember, this presentation will be available towards the end of the month on SUMA's YouTube channel. You now have a 5-minute break, maybe a few extra minutes. We're ending a little bit earlier. Whose first time is it at convention here today? Okay, perfect. Your session, there's another one, Introduction to Convention, is in meeting room 1 after the break. I highly recommend checking that out. If it's your first time, you're going to learn a lot about navigating conference and convention. Who is a SUMA Sure subscriber? Which community? Okay, you guys have a workshop. Your AGM is in Ballroom B after the coffee break. So I encourage you to check that out as well too. It's a great service provider for your municipality. So please join me again in thanking our presenter and our sponsor.